All right. Hello. Welcome back. This is Colin Keeley here.
And I'm Brent Sanders.
And we are the founders of Avocado, an audio publishing platform. So to set the stage this week, we're working on an acquisition. I've been pretty deep in this micro PE world for a while. And so we have one we like and we're progressing through it. And I sent over a template I have from a course on micro acquisitions for an asset purchase agreement. And the seller came back with hey, we actually, we sold this business in the past. We bought this business in the past. Here's the, asset purchase agreement. And let's maybe just use this because it's already built. And a lot of lawyers have invested a lot of time in this. It is lengthy. So what was your first, take on that, Brent, when you saw it?
It looked normal to me. I mean, it's 43 pages, which, I'm going through an acquisition in the past, just an operating agreement and partnership agreement. That's generally what, and using sort of large law firms in the past, I don't know how to categorize them, but I'd say big boy law firms. That seems to be more so what full on lawyering looks like. There's a 10 to 15 pages of just a glossary or definition of terms of here's what we mean when we say this, which is going to take up a lot of boilerplate. And then the terms look standard. So, I mean, this is the thing where there is this sort of all the English reading, all the legalese, it seems like it makes sense, but then it's, we obviously have to have our attorneys look at it in order to find anything in between those things that look normal to us. So it does sustain. It always reminds me, it sustains its own industry, right? It's you need an attorney to feel warm and fuzzy about. Even, we're in I feel like a good spot with the seller, where our terms and the business pieces are all aligned. And usually this is the point in a deal when it's oh, we're getting to the uncomfortable stuff and we have to kind of come up with, what the resolution will be if things go sideways. So it's always the tricky part of a conversation of getting it to the finish line.
Yeah. So this is a little tangent, but it's going to make sense. So I had my first shot for the Novavax clinical trial this week. So I was sitting in a room for there's probably 2 hours wasted time. So I was reading through this whole doc there. So if you're something that you want to automate, clinical trials are the most manual process. It's just shocking that any of them actually come to completion. Was my takeaway from this whole thing. It's all paper-based, and then the trial participants aren't of very high quality on average, and the people organizing the trial are not very organized. So it was a huge mess, but it gave me plenty of time to read through this whole document. And my takeaway was, in the startup world, there's safes now. So simple agreements for future equity. That Y Combinator came up in 2013 and is the default now for startups in the early stages. And there's no real equivalent for that in acquisitions. So it seems it should just, move in that direction. It doesn't have to be so maybe overly comprehensive for these smaller micro P deals.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, is the safe note there because it's always you're starting sort of greenfield and it's fresh and it's hey, here's a good starting point? Or is it, I don't know. I guess I haven't done enough of these to know if they're standard from sort of piece to piece, but from an asset purchase agreement or transfer agreement, you're going to take a bunch of things that already exist and give them to another person. They're going to pay for them or, finance them or something. I guess, how complicated can it be to a certain extent? It's hey, there's probably, 10 or 12 points that are important. Things like indemnification, hey, if you take this and do something bad with it, it's not the seller's fault, and or vice versa. Everyone's kind of protecting themselves, and what happens if things backfire, and there's confidentiality, and there's also typically a non-compete of some sort. They aren't going to go and start their own competitor. But yeah, I guess form versions of legal docs. It's like Legalzoom, that there is an industry for it. And I wonder, does Legalzoom have an APA that we could have used? I'm looking right now.
Yeah, I haven't seen any good options. So there's all these different steps. So in a early stage investing, it's just, hey, I want to invest in your company. Cool. Here's a safe for 100K. It's going to convert at this later date at this valuation with this discount. in acquisitions is like the letter of intent, there's NDAs, there's the purchase
Mm.
agreement, like setting up a new corporation, which basically a holding company, which I had to do this week. There's all that stuff, but it should be standardized. Like I don't really, all those things you mentioned, everyone probably wants in, and it'd be awesome if there's just more liquidity in this market and you didn't have to pay lawyers like thousands of dollars for each one. Cause I think both sides of the transaction understand like what should be in there, and you don't want any funny stuff, which is what safes kind of enable.
Yeah. I'm on rocketlawyer.com. I've got an 8-page asset purchase agreement. And what I'm seeing is it's got all, like I was just saying, it's got all of these different chapters, but they're all very short. So the arbitration clause is very short. The costs and expenses, every little piece does seem to be reflected in what we have. It's just much more succinct, which I guess is good. But yeah, I mean, it would be nice to be able to transact like this and not have to sink in, some percentage. And I think we were talking about before the podcast is like legal costs are all across the board. I mean, and I think to a certain extent, you feel like you're doing something stupid if you're not spending a lot of money. I mean, I've worked with people on transactions as a seller that, spent $20,000-$30,000 to do just their side of the transaction. And it's like, their justification was like, oh, I just don't want it to be done wrong. And it's almost like if they don't spend at least a certain amount of money, then there's a poor sort of product being put forth by the attorneys. So it's a weird market.
Yeah, I wonder if in startups there's Y Combinator, that's the kingmaker. There's just not an equivalent in acquisitions, so maybe there's no one with enough power to be like, hey, this is the doc that we all use, and go forward and use this, and we all trust it.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I have a weird perspective on contracts, and I think it's more so because I've done smaller transactions. It hasn't been like some huge merger of a big company, but of smaller companies that I've either built, sold, or acquired. It's been the legal docs are only as good as the paper they're on to a certain extent. It's like if things are going to go sideways, I don't know. And this is really not legal advice. I want to make sure that's clear, but it's like you're going to be better off. I guess it's probably true of the fact, and the thing that I'm thinking about here is that the value of the things that are being transacted on are either like acquisitions of people or talent versus hard assets. It's like you're just better off like figuring out a way and a framework to be able to negotiate with person. And it always starts with the business and ends with the business. So like the attorneys can get involved, but whenever you go to that nuclear option of like, all right, we're going to trial, we're gonna sue them for everything they got, it's just a game of who has more money. I hate to say that. And so in this case where I was saying, it's like, well, the deals I'm doing, nobody really has that much money to like go to war. But that's kind of how a lot of this stuff works. And so I guess as you escalate this up to, you see like Google and Microsoft and Apple in court kind of waging war, and they all have the sort of artillery to make it hurt. But I think on this micro level, I hate to say it, I think you're best suited to treat people well, and try to find resolutions before you have to go to arbitration and things like that. And I think a lot of that is on you as who you choose as a deal partner. And I think that's a lot of what due diligence is about in negotiating terms, like asking for things, see how they respond. I was just talking to a friend of mine who just sold his business that he built for maybe about 10 years, e-commerce business. And they were shopping around to acquirers. And one was a deal partner where, they would make, pitch a line item, say, hey, this is what we're thinking, our revenue's here. And every time they went back and forth, the potential buyer would change their terms and would actually go in the other direction. So instead of meeting in the middle, they were, the pulling like the art of the deal type thing is, oh, the deal's getting worse as you negotiate with me. So it's just like, I think people give you these indications early on. And I think, if you want to, you can always say, hey, well, we have a contract and it's enforceable. It's like it is, but it's also like comes along with a huge burden of cost. Like you better be ready to spend probably more than we're actually buying this company for. It's like you better be ready to and make case for damages, and you have to see if you're going to actually get that out of somebody. I mean, I've dealt with this a lot in consulting too, of like, somebody tries to stiff you for an invoice or a bill and it's like $7,000. It's like getting in touch with an attorney at this point is like not even going to be worth it. It's like $7,000 is a lot of money. It's like the legal system in the business world, it's like doesn't really apply to these smaller transactions is sort of my conclusion.
Yeah, all these deals are just based on trust. So like at any moment, if trust starts to break down, I think the deal is just over. Like it's just not worth it on either side to continue. Which I think is why you could be like the nice guy and the easy acquirer in this industry and get a massive, discount because people are just happy to work with you. These transactions could be so messy and illegal costs just quickly eat into whatever money you're going to make in it. And if you're just like easygoing, I think that goes a long way.
Yeah. Yeah. But what do they say? Nice guys finish last. You gotta be coming in here like stirring some shit up and turning businesses around. I don't know. I mean, that is my inclination. I would tell you the thing that I've learned from doing a handful of deals and seeing how the most successful people I've seen operate is like they are not the Donald Trumps of the world. They're not out to sort of dunk on you and spike the ball in your face. They make it seem like and feel like everybody's winning. And therefore you're walking away with a good feeling. And everyone's walking away not feeling scorned, and they're not going to you're not going to expect to see a lawsuit from them 6 months from now. And whether that's, everybody doing the right thing and choosing the right deal partners, or more so just framing, I don't know, maybe it is just having somebody make you feel good about losing, or, patting you on the back and saying next time, I don't know. But I do think there is an element to keeping people's like human emotions and like they're still human as part of these transactions. That is the part that I am a big believer in. It's like everyone has to walk away feeling like they got what they wanted and they don't feel like they're getting screwed. And that is a great way to stay out of, getting huge invoices from attorneys.
Yeah, this is the whole kind of Warren Buffett or Andrew Wilkinson playbook is just like, hey, we're not like douchey private equity guys. We're that nice, old timey guy from Omaha. I'll just do a handshake deal and you're going to give me a good deal because, it's so pleasant to deal with. So I do think there's something there, and they are genuine. I mean, they do this job for like 80 years. So you build up quite a reputation over time. Well, I think that's good on that end. And then you had this idea for automation sprints that I kind of like with Formulated. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So I've done maybe half dozen to a dozen design sprints. And so the design sprint was this thing that came out like, I feel like 4 years ago, was popularized by Google Ventures. The folks, I think Jake Knapp wrote a book on it of like, how do we build a product? How do we get everybody on the same page? And it was really oriented from the product side of things of like, hey, the way of doing it in the past has been, let's do wireframes, and you play this like waterfall game of passing things back and forth over email, and it takes months and things never get done. And it's like, if you can just get everybody in a room for 1 week, and it's really 3 very intensive days, basically 8 to 5, 8 to 4, something like that, with a lunch break and maybe some email breaks, and you get all the stakeholders, which is usually like 5 people plus yourself in a room, and perform some exercises. You can actually end up doing some user testing by the end of that week. And then in 5 days, you're actually really far along on your product. You have everybody moving in the same direction. You're in agreement. You've teased out all the other crazy ideas and ruled them out, the ones that you don't, or you've embraced them. Somebody had something in the back of their mind that they, wanted to share about what needs to be in our mobile app or what needs to be in our website experience. You got that out of them. And it turned in this really successful trend. From like a consulting perspective, we were using it and had a lot of success of just like kicking off projects, finding out if we'd be the right fit for somebody. It was a pretty affordable way to get to know the clients as well. Like if you're going to go in and step in as a developer on somebody's, web application, you're going to spend a week with them in a room and know if they're genuinely trying to build something, and they'll get a sense for you as well. And it usually was a great like foundation to build for, the next 12 weeks or 6 weeks of development, whatever it was. So now kind of stepping in this automation frame, we're looking at this challenge where we have companies that, have repeatable process that have, a bunch of automation opportunities. They don't really know how to capitalize them. Just like they know they wanted to get a web app or a mobile app or be able to transact something online, but they didn't really know how to do it and what those steps were. And so we've basically come up with a very similar concept where it's, pitching really only two people to come in, a software architect and a business analyst, and come in and, trap people, essentially get them to spend, a dedicated slotted amount of time, which was the key to the design sprint. So there were activities as part of the design sprint where, we're trying to sort of transpose those to automation, but the more so key was time box activities. Like you would know from 8 to 5, you've got to, like, as you sign the agreement to work with us, you've got to spend this time with us, and you have to make sure the resources you have on your team know that. And so that's really like the hidden value of like, hey, we're actually going to spend 1 week on process, and sure, we're going to automate it. And that's sort of a byproduct, but that's the byproduct of either reworking processes or improving processes.
I love this idea of like a very intense, it's a little bit of hardship on their end. Like, look, this is serious. We need your time. This is going to be a very, intense few days. And it forces them to kind of invest in it as well. And they, feel that hardship. And then you get to prove your value with like a pretty small investment and kind of build a pretty deep connection, I imagine, with the other party. And I think they'd be happy to see like all the potential from there and, grow into a much larger deal as it goes on.
Yeah, I think the thing that's hard to see with the automation business is like, you're usually being engaged by a manager or like a C-suite person who's like, yeah, we've got a lot of people doing things that we don't really think are high value, and we want to elevate our team. We want to have them working on human problems, and we're just getting overloaded with accounting tasks or whatever it is. We're chasing paper. And what a lot of companies we're finding are doing, they did the digital transformation maybe 8 years ago, and all they really transformed into is like digital versions of their paper equivalents. There's still slips and forms and all this junk that they have to sort of shuttle between the organization. And they didn't really transform in the sense that like, hey, we can actually glean some of those slips and forms and activities into a database or into like a real sort of format. It's not just a digital version of paper, which sure, that's easier. You don't have a mail cart, but instead you have an email box that's, full every single day, and you're just kind of chipping away at these processes. So, I think it's really about process. That's been my, I think, fairly recent. We've had people on the formulated automation podcast around like this is really not an automation game. It's a process game. And I'm coming around to that and realizing in our practice and our consulting work, that's where the magic happens. And so, spending that time and getting to know the process, and there's no better way to do it. If you do it in the old way, going back to how we would build product, is like the UX designer would do some interviewing and then spend a week on wireframes, and then and things would slowly start to drift away from the original intent as they're sort of working on their own. And so I think that's the thing where it's like a business analyst can interview somebody, then wait a week, put together a document, deliver it. And it's like playing telephone. You start to add or change details, and it drifts more and more from the original like actual process. And so by the time you deliver a bot, let's say you went through that process for a month, it doesn't quite do what you wanted. So that 1 week, hey, let's sit down day to day for really, I shouldn't say a week, it's like 3 days of intensive sort of back and forth collaborative work. That seems to be the best way to sort of build that everyone is thinking the same way. And then, as you said, you can unleash that one department and they can kind of share that story and understand, hey, this is this thing called automation. We've embraced it in this way. And other people in the organization kind of realize there are ways to go about doing that. So the thing we try to leave people with, though, is that, some form of capabilities building of like, here's how to think about things that can be automated. Here's what can be done. Here's what can't be done. You don't have to necessarily build this out yourself, but this is the way to think about it.
Yeah, I love this. So from the outside, it's hard to know what to pitch. Like there's so many possible use cases, but you don't really know what's going to resonate with whatever the problems are within the company that they're dealing with. So this is such a good way to get your foot in the door. I think it's a really clever like wedge into a company, and then you just land and expand from there.
Yeah. We'll see how it works out. I mean, I would say the design sprint solved the big problem on the product business, on sort of like whether it's web or mobile or whatever, we were building some software piece. It just solved this, like, how do we get started problem, and how do we get everybody on the same page, and like the normal tasks that we were doing before just weren't working. So yeah, I'm optimistic around it. I think there is something to it. I think there is definitely something to intensive, like almost like a team building exercise where you'll know if you're a fit and you know if it's a good way to go. And in either way, whether it's not a fit, you walk away with something of value.
Yes, I like this. Well, cool. We'll keep you updated on how this progresses, all the listeners. Anything else you want to cover? All set?
No, I'm just freezing. It's cold here.
Yeah.
It's supposed to get colder.
It's been weird here. So it's been like 10 degrees all week, but it's snowing right now. It snowed like every day, which I didn't think was really possible with this cold. But all right. Well, till next week. I'll talk to you guys later.
Take care.